Let me introduce you to a rule most people never learn. Mental speed is irrelevant if you're running in the wrong direction. You can be twice as fast, twice as motivated, and still lose to someone twice as slow if their thinking is calibrated while yours is corrupted. And most minds today, they're not slow. They're misaligned, built on decades of emotional noise, inherited fears, and outdated thinking patterns. That's why this algorithm is not based on speed. It's based on mental trajectory correction. The first module, cognitive clarity. The smarter mind strips story, not because it's emotionless, but because it's allergic to distortion. You've been trained to think in stories. I was betrayed. She abandoned me. They ruined everything. But these aren't facts. They're dramatized edits. Your brain is addicted to drama because drama feels alive, but aliveness isn't clarity, it's noise. The smarter mind doesn't say, I was hurt. It says, an expectation collapsed. It doesn't say, they used me. It says, a miscalculated pattern repeated. You see the difference? One traps you in emotion. The other opens the door to mastery. Most people don't want truth. They want a story where they're the hero or the victim. But intelligence isn't about being the main character. It's about deleting the character altogether, so you can see the raw structure of reality. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clean. No fog, no fiction, just signal. When you stop narrating, you start noticing. And in that silence, data speaks. Suddenly, you realize you weren't rejected. You were redirected. You weren't betrayed. You were misaligned. You weren't cursed. You were taught. It's not about being heartless. It's about seeing without hallucination. Your ego will resist this. It wants to be the center of a tragic movie. It wants to feel special, even if that means staying in pain. But the intelligent mind knows better. It doesn't need a story to feel complete. It just needs truth, unedited, unfiltered, unromanticized. Because the moment you delete the narrative, you don't just see reality more clearly, you move through it like a ghost, unstuck, unshaken, unstoppable. 2. Cognitive velocity mapping. Most people don't realize this. Your brain is not just thinking. It's racing toward a conclusion, toward the comfort of, I know. But intelligence isn't measured by how fast you reach an answer. It's measured by how long you can stay in the tension of the unknown, without flinching. Cognitive velocity is your internal stopwatch, not to rush thought, but to observe it. You track how quickly your mind tries to end the discomfort of uncertainty. You examine the micro moments where your brain rushes to define, to label, to resolve. And instead of indulging that speed, you slow it down. You feel the impulse to label someone as wrong, and you wait. You feel the urge to defend your opinion, and you don't. You learn to stretch the gray zone. The genius mind isn't obsessed with being correct. It's obsessed with being precise, and precision demands time. Time to absorb patterns, time to see contradictions, time to let truth reveal itself, not be forced out of panic. The amateur fills silence with opinion. The expert watches the silence for anomaly. You stop reacting to the loudest idea. You start noticing what hasn't been said. That gap between thought and conclusion is where innovation begins. This is not indecision. It's deliberate incompleteness, a conscious refusal to rush the mind's process. You train yourself to be the last one to speak, not to be passive, but to be precise. Because while the world honors fast talkers, it quietly obeys those who think like surgeons, slow, sharp, surgical. And when your cognitive velocity drops low enough, you don't just answer better. You start seeing what others can't even perceive. Third concept, reversal training. Most minds are followers of thought. They inherit frameworks, then defend them like religion. But the dangerous mind, it does something different. It reverses instinct. When the world says, this is success, you ask, what if that's failure in disguise? When they say, he's confident because he dominates, you ask, what if true confidence is the ability to disappear and still control the room? This isn't about being a contrarian. It's about building cognitive inversion, a mental muscle that doesn't cling to patterns but interrogates them, tears them open, rebuilds them backward. Because here's the secret. Intelligence is not just creation, it's demolition. You take the accepted path and cut it in half. You take a belief and flip it until it breaks. You take an assumption and inject it with its opposite until it either shatters or transforms. Why? Because most people live in conceptual cages, invisible boxes made from ideas they never questioned. You walk in with a mental sledgehammer. This isn't comfortable. It requires warping your own lens, but it's necessary because real intelligence isn't polite, it's invasive. While the average mind upgrades by adding more knowledge, you upgrade by subtracting assumptions. Most people fear being wrong. You hunt for it because you know every flawed assumption you destroy becomes a new foundation. And here's what they won't tell you. The most adaptable minds on Earth don't learn more. They flip faster. They can look at any system, emotional, political, strategic, and instantly see what it would become if reversed. That's not just intelligence. That's mental insurgency. You're not following the rules of the game. You're reverse engineering the game itself. And that is when you stop being predictable and start becoming dangerous. 4. Narrative deletion protocol. Your brain doesn't remember life. It rewrites it, not as raw data, but as drama. Every event is run through a silent filter, a filter made of wounds, wants, and warped memory. She didn't walk away. She abandoned you. You didn't lose a job. You were humiliated. You weren't corrected. You were disrespected. The event is neutral, but the story your mind tells about it, that's where the infection begins. Narrative is emotional malware. It feels like clarity, but it's distortion wrapped in familiarity. This protocol trains you to detect it, to isolate it, to delete it. You start asking, what actually happened, without the adjectives? What am I adding that doesn't belong? Because behind every narrative is an ego fighting for significance. It wants to be the victim, the hero, the martyr, the genius, the misunderstood one. But intelligence doesn't want to feel right. It wants to see right. So you rip out the storyline. And all that's left is signal. She left. That's all. You made a decision. It didn't work. That's it. No shame, no symbolism, no theatrical monologue running in the background, just clean data, just facts. And when you process reality without narrative, you stop reliving pain. You start refining perception, because stories aren't just illusions. They're loops. They trap you in cycles of self-reinforcement. Over time, you begin to believe your own edits, and that's when you become blind. But when you delete the story layer, you don't become cold. You become precise. You're not detaching from emotion, you're detaching from the emotional fiction, and only then can you finally see what happened. Not how it felt, but what it was. That's not numbness, that's psychological sovereignty. 5. Mirror neuron override. Your nervous system wasn't built for sovereignty. It was built for survival within a tribe. You mirror the tribe's stress. You reflect their fear. You copy their tension. Not because you're weak, but because evolution hardwired your neurons to sync with the emotional temperature around you. That's why you feel tired around unmotivated people. Why anxiety spreads through a room without a single word. Why one person's rage can ignite yours. It's not spiritual, it's neurological. Mirror neurons, tiny biological spies, constantly watching others and replicating them inside you. But here's what the average mind never learns. You can turn the signal off. The elite thinker doesn't just react slower, they disconnect entirely. You train yourself to become emotionally desynced, a ghost within the social matrix. How? You compress your facial micro-expressions until they reveal nothing. You anchor your gaze not on people's eyes, but just past them, removing yourself from their emotional current. You lower your breathing into the diaphragm, so your voice remains deep, calm, and slow, immune to spikes. These aren't tricks. They're neurological countermeasures, because once your nervous system stops echoing others, you become psychologically invisible. You walk into a room full of chaos and feel nothing. You hear panic in someone's voice, and your pulse doesn't change. You witness emotional outbursts, and your cognition stays clean, cold, sharp. This isn't about becoming robotic. It's about reclaiming your mental sovereignty. Because the person who can feel everything is easily manipulated. But the one who can feel without absorbing, that person becomes ungovernable. You weren't born to be a mirror. You were born to be a firewall. And once you override that mirror neuron system, the world's noise no longer controls your signal. You don't adapt to the room adapts to you. 6. strategic reality collapse. You think you see the world, but what you actually see is pre-installed language. Words, meanings, definitions, downloaded into your mind before you could reject them. You were told what success is, what love means, what failure, confidence, intelligence, even reality itself should look like. But here's the brutal truth. Most people are not living in the world. They're living inside a simulation built by other people's expectations, their parents, their culture, their trauma, their society's insecurities, disguised as values. You don't see what is. You see what you were taught to see. That's why the intelligent mind initiates a full collapse. Strategic, surgical, brutal. You question every inherited definition until it crumbles under its own weight. You don't just redefine success. You delete the old word entirely. Career becomes leverage execution architecture. Confidence becomes emotional control under volatile conditions. Failure becomes tactical feedback iteration. Love becomes a neurochemical contract enforced by illusion. Truth becomes what remains after every belief has been burned. You no longer borrow reality. You build it, line by line, like code. And here's what happens when the collapse is complete. Your brain stops reacting to old symbols. It no longer lights up at praise, at approval, at guilt, at shame, because those were responses written for an identity that no longer exists. Now, you respond with design. You interpret with precision. You act with internal logic, not inherited myth. You are not playing society's game. You are writing your own simulation, with rules that obey strategy, not tradition. This isn't rebellion. This is reprogramming. And once your operating system is clean, every word becomes a weapon. Every meaning becomes yours. And reality finally becomes negotiable. So you've stripped the narrative. You've overridden mimicry. You've collapsed the inherited version of reality. Now we go further, into the mental weaponry most minds will never encounter. This is where the algorithm shifts from intelligence to tactical dominance. Before we unlock the next layer, I want to introduce you to a system that was never meant to be written. It's not an ebook. It's a warpath disguised as a blueprint. Whispers Cognitive Overclock, the forbidden 90-day manual for rewriting the mind they trained you to protect. This is not motivational fluff, not recycled productivity advice. This is psychological warfare against comfort, distraction, and internal weakness. Inside this ebook, you'll enter a 90-day assault against the soft mind. Cold focus, rituals to force your brain to operate under pressure, neural endurance training to expand your cognitive threshold, flow state engineering to trigger ruthless focus at will, dopamine warfare, protocols to crush shallow pleasure addiction, strategic fatigue and recovery loops to sharpen your mental blade, and the full overclock blueprint to install permanent mental dominance. This ebook doesn't just teach, it transforms. It is built to destroy who you are and forge what you were meant to become. If you're ready to enter the 90-day war, then download Whisper's Cognitive Overclock now. And if you want to go even deeper, if you want access to the full vault of forbidden psychological tools, dark intelligence, emotional detachment, cognitive manipulation, then the Whispers Power Bundle is waiting for you when you're ready. The link is in the pinned comment. Begin the war. 7. Perceptual weaponization. Most people observe the world passively. They see, but they don't influence. Their eyes absorb, but their mind remains neutral. You train your vision into a strategic weapon. Because here's the secret. The world doesn't run on facts. It runs on frames. And the person who frames the situation controls the outcome. If you can define what's being seen, you define how others feel. And if you can shape what they feel, you shape what they do. This is perceptual dominance, not by speaking louder, but by watching deeper. You learn to speak only after scanning. Facial micro-twitches, breath rhythms, pupil dilation, noticing where their attention breaks, where their confidence leaks, where their mask slips, and instead of reacting, you anchor. You hold stillness so precise it becomes gravitational, because movement chases